In part one of this series, I talked about the failure of radical intactivism and intactivism in general. Today, I want to talk about how the intactivist community's desire to reach out to the transgender community in particular and the LGBT in general is flawed. I mentioned how even in supposedly breakaway groups like Forefront, men were unable to build a foundation from which to launch real-world activism. They seem incapable of creating and maintaining their own spaces for the purpose of either helping each other or addressing male issues. Intactivists seem obsessed with trying to ride on the coattails of other movements and seeking their validation. In a supposedly more male-oriented Forefront, men are still unable to maintain order and boundaries, let alone come to a consensus on goals and principles. Today I want to address this trans issue and why trans will never be an ally to men on any front. I also want to lay to rest these accusations of transphobia once and for all. Like misogyny, transphobia is an attack launched on men simply for being human. Additionally, no matter how much I attack the right, sectors of the left will accuse me of being right-wing simply for speaking out on issues that affect men. In fact, the last two videos I made, I called out right-wingers in my audience. My compatriots have even accused me of being spammy and obsessive. I wholeheartedly disagree, as my videos brought out several snakes in the grass. I've come to the realization that right-wingers operate by invading other spaces in the attempt to make themselves as relevant as possible, as they have nothing novel to say and offer no solutions. The only way to keep them out is to attack them as relentlessly as possible and just make them feel really uncomfortable to be around you. In particular, this subscriber called Toxic Masculinity wrote an anti-Semitic comment on my latest video, accusing me of being full of shit, in quotes, being full of shit. He never commented on any of my videos. I asked him some direct questions to which I got no response. Just by his name alone, I can tell he's one of these edgy alt-writers who takes on a name and an aura, ironically, only for it to become unironic. I can only guess he subbed to me because of my video on toxic masculinity. I pointed out to him in the videos and in the comment section that they don't even browse, these right-wingers don't even browse my videos. These MGTOW guys, whatever, the same thing. Anyone that's, all you have to do is spend 5 seconds looking at my channel, and you can see that I speak out against racism and the right, and MGTOW. I've come to the realization that the way men behave is not even conscious. Whether they are on the left or the right, men will always scapegoat other men as opposed to realizing that they are discriminated against on a societal level, on a macro level. Men have no idea on a collective or an individual level how to assert themselves or how to even maintain a frame of reference of them being human beings with some basic dignity. They always come off like they're somehow pleading or begging to be appreciated, or needed, or valuable. These guys come to my channel, and they come to channels like mine because, quite frankly, they have nowhere else to go. These racists are tradcon mate guarders who understand that, by and large, society rejects their views. They might network in secret, but the only way they can spread their ideas is to surreptitiously insert themselves into non-mainstream spaces, such as ours, pro-male spaces. In the first place, men turn to racism and the right in general because they are low status but don't know how to network socially. Networking, you have, I know that a lot of self-help gurus and whatever, it's the buzzword of the day, networking, and there is it's a lot of it's bullshit, but there is some truth to it. The bottom line is that networking is the only way to either gain status or to collectively improve the conditions of people at your level of status. In other words, to organize a fight for, better working conditions, whatever. I mean, all the social movements throughout history that have changed people's lives on a mass level happened on basically because of networking, people working together. However, I've seen the same type of behavior from men on the left. Men on the left will posture about who's more left-wing or who's more virtuous, who's more revolutionary, blah, blah, blah. Organizing and getting shit done only seems to happen when a single issue crystallizes and everyone focuses on it. And I speak on this from looking at history and looking at when things have actually changed. For all their tough talk, men they're really only action and goal oriented when the situation is straightforward or dire. So like if it's a survival situation, life or death, or, we've got, if it's an extreme situation where everything's on the line, men will get their shit together. And I will say that while men on the left are more social and honest than men on the right, they still scapegoat and they still have a hard time working together. I mean, I've seen it on the left. I mean, you always get this, it's all it's all the capitalists, there's nothing you can do, nothing will change, the deep state, blah, blah, blah. You get the same sorts of attitudes on the left as on the right. Most importantly, I've seen this kind of behavior in Intactivism itself, which is neither a left versus right issue. In fact, even for an issue as simple, straightforward, and single issue, and as dire as MGM, men cannot focus or work together. They still scapegoat, they posture, they bring their own ideological baggage. They all want to be leaders. They fail to draw boundaries. Most importantly, they fail to assert themselves socially as a group. They just this is something that affects just them, and they're embarrassed to be indignant. They should be indignant at this, but they can't stand up for themselves, even though it's an obvious case of them being wronged. Men can't create or maintain their own spaces with structure to serve them. They need validation from outsiders and women. They're too focused on numbers and appealing to authority. They can't come to a consensus with each other on what their goals and values are and what they are willing to sacrifice. Eventually, all their groups become disorganized and they fall apart. In particular, with Intactivism, and I want to say this because I've seen this on the left where, I'm talking about Intactivism, but even on the left, you see all these weird fringe groups, and they pop up and then they disappear and they pop up. This is not just Intactivism, even though I'm speaking about Intactivism in this instance. In particular with Intactivism, it seems like men are pleading and are asking for help. This became apparent to me when I saw Intactivists repeatedly appealing to the LGBT and transsexual community. Intactivists have been trying to make themselves relevant in the LGBT movement with little success in making themselves relevant in mainstream society. While the LGBT has accepted intactivists, I think for the most part, they've not promoted them either. If anything, such measures have actually alienated mainstream support for intactivism. In many ways, what their tactics are painting them into a corner as being kind of, fruity and out there and just a little bizarre. I'm not saying per se, and I have addressed this in other videos, that it's homophobia, but I mean, when these intactivists go to gay pride parades, and don't get me wrong, I think the gay pride parades are fun. I've been in them myself. But when they go to all these, not just gay pride parades, but all the other parades too, and they dress up funny, it's just completely the wrong vibe. It turns normal people off. These inflated penises and all this stuff. It's just, it's bad optics. Now with the transsexual community, this is even more apparent. The optics here are even worse, and it's not just a case of the optics. It's just a case of really bad strategy. The fact that intactivists are willing to latch on to such a fringe movement shows how weak, disorganized, and desperate intactivists are. It shows that men, in particular, are completely incapable of standing up for themselves as a group. I mean, face it, intactivism, this is really a men's issue. And, men are what? 50% of the population? So, and, I mean, they're intactivists that are trying to appeal to trans, which are, like, minuscule in number. When I posted my hijacking video, numerous intactivists told me I should be working with them, not hijacking them. I remember, if you watch the video, the lady then comes up to me and she's angry at me, blah, blah, blah. She said I was hijacking. I mean, I've stated repeatedly that intactivists have passed up numerous opportunities to make themselves relevant and hijack. This trans issue is a perfect example. I've been accused of being a transphobe. I want to take this opportunity to address Trevor Cormier's video response to my hijacking video. So he did a video a while back. There was a response to my hijacking video, and I want to address all this transphobia nonsense. As Trevor correctly pointed out, the trans movement will never ally with men on any issue. While the gay community is just as controlled politically by feminists, gay men are still, can be and are still sympathetic to male issues like male genital mutilation. I've seen this. There's a lot of support amongst gay men. Even if gay men are submissive to women, like the rest of all men are, the trans community is different. The rank and file of the trans movement is made up of men that either consciously want female privilege or are simply so lost and confused that they want to escape their male identity altogether. Now, whether they're conscious of this or not, on some level these guys know that there is increasingly nothing for them to gain from male identity. And they are simply trying to get the hell out of Dodge. These guys are not coming from a place of principle or ethics, or even understanding, I should say. I've said this before, and I'll say this again. I have nothing against them dressing as women, or any of their behaviors, no matter how weird they are. I'm weird. Everyone deserves human rights, even if they are deemed strange or deviant by society, or if they're like, a small minority. Human rights are human rights. I still support human rights. I don't believe these guys deserve to be beat up or even, discriminated against in housing or whatever. The problem I have with the transsexual community, is that they buy into this radioactive feminist rhetoric and are deeply anti-male. This becomes even more apparent in the context of MGM, male genital mutilation. And I'm going to explain why. If trans were sincere in general about, human rights and equality, they would be more concerned with MGM than society accepting them as actual real women. Not having a foreskin makes it much harder to transition into being a woman. You need the skin to create the inner vagina. Here's the point. Most of these transsexual guys do not want to undergo surgery and remove their genitalia. I've talked to a lot of them. I always found it ironic that a movement ostensibly for sexual liberation and personal freedom would conveniently forget the case of David Reamer. This became even more apparent to me recently as the transsexual community tried to ban intersex cutting in California, while at the same time excluding males from protection in the wording of this legislation. So, I don't know if my audience, if you're familiar, so there's intersex exists, so they have ambiguous genitalia, and sometimes when they're born, the doctor says, okay, well, you're closer to a male or female, so we're going to snip here and snip there so that voila, you're definitely a guy or a girl, whatever. It's fraught with problems. No child's genitals should be cut, even in that case. So I'm not against it. I even in the cases like that, I'm against any form of genital cutting. However, they excluded males from the wording. This speaks to me not only of their priorities, the transsexual community, but their schizophrenic feminist rhetoric. Like feminists, transsexuals can't get their story straight ideologically on whether men and women have different brains or bodies. Now, for brevity's sake, I will assume my audience is not insane and accepts that men and women are physically different for reasons other than a patriarchal conspiracy. Yes, there are actual feminists out there that think men and women are different physically because of it's a social construct. I don't want to get into it. They're nuts. They think that men are encouraged more to develop upper body strength. It's fucking retarded. Just forget it. More mainstream amongst feminists is that men and women have the same brains but behave differently because of some political, economic superstructure called patriarchy. Now, this is much more common. Men and women are essentially the same, and whatever the differences in behaviors and outcomes and the relationships between men and women. It's all a social construct, blank slate theory, blah blah blah. Now, the David Reamer case is relevant here because it gruesomely laid to rest this nonsense idea of gender fluidity, or this blank slate idea that you're just born a blob and you become male or female. For all that are not aware, David Reamer was a Canadian man that suffered a botched circumcision as a child. I'm not going to get into the details, but it's gruesome. You can look it up. but they cut off, basically they burned off his penis, and he was subsequently raised as a female. They thought it was like the best solution. Oh boy, yeah, as a teen, he insisted he was a male, even though he'd been raised a female. He transitioned back into being a male. They try to create him a penis. And later in life, after much pointless misery and suffering, he blew his head off with a shotgun. It's not a coincidence to me that trans ignore such a gruesome case. The transsexual community want to have their cake and eat it too by buying into the feminist narrative of gender and sex being separate and women and men being the same. That there's this gender and the sex. And I can't even understand the feminist theory. It's a lot of horseshit. They assert this ideology at the same time while asserting that I'm talking about the trans, that they are women trapped in a men's body. So they essentially think that like the male brain and the female brain are the same, but men and women behave differently because of like society forcing it on them somehow through conditioning and force. But they believe they're guys, but they believe that they have a female brain and that they're trapped in a man's body. Now, radfems call out the trans community all the time on their bullshit, because unlike the intersectional feminists, they're too autistic to maintain this bullshit facade of humanitarian unity and the fight for equality, as Trevor pointed out. I mean, the radfems are just, no, we're here for women, and we're pro-female. These radfems, they see these transsexuals, these male to female transsexuals, as men invading female spaces. Now, this leads me to my point. These trans are not concerned with human rights or vague notions of equality. They're not actually interested in changing their sex surgically. They just want to force society to accept them as women and give them all the privileges that women have, while blaming men for them, these trans, these male to female, for blaming men for not accepting them as women. And I want everyone to keep in mind that there's far more male to female than female to male trans. Okay? So the vast majority of the trans community is guys that want to be women. For obvious reasons, as I will explain. The kicker is you can't force people to change their perspective of you, not by law. You can't do it. It's not a human right. The way that people think of you is not something you can be entitled to or change. You can't get inside their heads. Being treated equally under the law is. Now, that is a human right. But policing people's speech and their thought is not. I mean, sure, it's like, it might be offensive if they want to be addressed as a female, but, they're addressed as a male. I get it. It's offensive. But it's not you're by their words. You're not, you can't oppress someone just through words by being offensive alone. That's not oppression. If a man can pass as a woman, he, she, whatever, is in no need of any legislation or special protection. If they really look like a woman, you're never going to know it. unless they are intimate with someone, there's no way to verify their true identity. The problem is these trans, they want, these transsexual male to female, they want women, men and women, to accept them as women on an intimate level. Like, they actually want to be accepted as women. I've even heard the argument that not being sexually attracted to these guys, females, whatever, or willing to have sex with them is transphobia. I've heard these arguments. This is very creepy. This is borderline rape. If I started demanding that people address me as a 16th century French aristocrat, with the title Your Majesty, people would laugh in my face. I mean, it's absurd. I'm not a billionaire, and I'm not, a duke. And if I told people, you will address me as Your Majesty because feelings, I mean, this is almost everyone would assume that I'm nuts. Now, the only difference is that in the case of trans, it's worse. It's even worse. Now, the best analogy I can come up with is that they are like, imagine mixed race slaves demanding freedom and to be seen as white people. Go back hundreds of years, even if they do not look white. So let's say you've got a mixed race person. You can tell they're mulatto or half white, half black. Imagine these people. They're born into slavery, and they want to be seen as white with all the privileges of being white. You can own slaves, and they want to. They have a movement to fight to be seen as white, but they don't have a problem with slavery itself for black people. They don't have a problem against discrimination against black people. They just don't want to be discriminated against because they're half black. Slaves that actually, now think about this, slaves that actually look white would simply try to pass as white. So if you have a slave that's, let's say, only one quarter black, this happened, right? And let's say they could pass as a white person. I mean, if I was in that situation, I would simply just hide the fact that I had any black blood in me, and I would try to pass as white so that I wouldn't be discriminated against. These trans, they literally, the position they're essentially taking is absurd. It's like you're even though most of them are visibly not female, they demand that you accept them as female. If they really looked female, there would be no need for this in the first place. Like the fact that they are demanding this speaks to the fact that they don't look like women. They don't look like women because they're not women. They were born men, and most of them, they have a penis, and they still want their penis. They're not gonna undergo any surgery. They might take hormones and grow breasts. A lot of them don't. I mean, they just look like guys in drag. These trans have no ethics or principles. And most of them know they don't look like women. And they don't, part of the reason why they don't want to transition is they still want to have sex with both men and women. And I know this from talking to a lot of trans. There's nothing, these trans, these male to female trans are nothing more than male feminists in skirts that are willing to throw other men under the bus for the acceptance of women. In other words, these guys, these transsexuals, are no different in mentality from your average guy. These transsexuals will never be an ally to men, ever. As Trevor Cormier stated, we've extended the olive branch over and over again, only to be spat in the face. I mean, you could. I mean, we've look at ContraPoints. Look at the videos made by ContraPoints. I mean, we've talked to them in the comment section. As you guys know, in my audience, I've talked to trans in face to face in real life. Intactivists make a huge mistake in trying to ally with transsexuals. The time for reaching out and seeking sympathy is over. We must obnoxiously hijack and derail, just like the feminists and right-wing racists, but for our own agenda and for ourselves. Men need to obnoxiously demand their rights and freedoms for themselves. And when you know, these right-wing nut jobs say, "Oh, you sound like a feminist now, like only for men," I'm like, good. We need this. Good. I'm glad. It means I'm doing something right. No one else is going to do it for us. No one else is going to demand our rights and freedoms for us. If you look throughout history, groups are freed because they take it upon themselves to free them, or they free themselves, or they take it upon themselves to better their situation. Men need to develop their own identity, their own collective identity, and think and act for themselves. And this means throwing off the straitjacket that has been of gender roles that has been thrust upon them, and while at the same time rejecting feminist ideology that says, "Oh, those gender roles exist because of you guys, or because you benefit from them, or some nonsense." No, gender roles hurt men, and men alone. Period. Okay? Men need their own identity, and it's time to take action.